Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today we'll be reviewing Team Daimyo's presentation on Chapter 3 of Tour of Duty, focusing on the Daimyo procession. First off, great job to the team. Your video was well done. Everyone sounded super clear and knowledgeable what they were talking about. It's clear that a lot of thought went into breaking down the key themes of the chapter. This chapter dives into how Daimyo processions weren't just about traveling to and from Edo. They were grand performances, blending military tradition with political theater. These processions reinforce the power of both the individual daimyo and the Tokugawa shogunate, all while being meticulously staged events for the public to witness. It's fascinating how something as simple as a journey could carry so much meaning, from demonstrating hierarchy to shaping public perception of authority. So in today's discussion, we'll be unpacking some of the themes from Team Daimyo's video and connecting them to broader ideas in the chapter. We'll touch on the spectacle of these processions, their role maintaining political control, and how they compare to similar displays of power in other historical contexts. Let's get started. Our first question is going to be, what kind of people might have you seen at the Daimyo procession?
Hi, my name is Andres, and I'll be answering question one. So for to answer question one, at the Daimyo's possessions, we've seen different social classes. Mainly, of course, it would be the Daimos. Um, and in his procession, you would have attack parties, sorry, my apologies, advanced parties like such as quartermasters, scribes, or cooks. You would also have his personal luggage that was carried on horses. And in a daimyo possession, you would see, I believe over more than a dozen horses, because they would also he also had his personal escort troops. He would also have one of the most important components of the daimyo's possession was a the rear guard, which would facilitate and ensure that there wouldn't be any attacks from the back. An important important thing I wanted to mention was that during the Tokugawa period, as we know, it was an era of peace and not really much of warfare compared to previous centuries. It was more of a parade, the procession, rather than an actual military force. The only instance in where there was like a military force would be the Shimabara Rebellion, and that was when the daimyo possession was in effect like for war. But other than that, it would be mostly as a parade, as a show of power, and a show of um to display the daimyo's wealth and influence over the land.
My next question will be, what were some similarities and differences between Daimyo processions and European aristocratic processions?
Hi, yes, thank you so much for the question. My name is Barbara, and I'll be answering it. So I think the comparison between daimyo processions and European royal or aristocratic processions is really fascinating. And I think the group did a great job of highlighting the key similarities and differences between these as well. As they pointed out, both were unmistakable displays of power, featuring large entourages, military escorts, and elaborate preparations by local authorities. However, when we look deeper into the symbolic and performative nature of these processions, we can see some key nuances that make daimyo processions really unique. One important distinction is that while European rulers traveled to reinforce their authority in a direct way, by visiting vassals, holding court, and engaging in celebrations, the daimyo processions were, in essence, a performance of subjugation rather than dominance. As Vapores describes, daimyo were portable lords, while the shogun remained static at the center of power in Edo. This created an inverse dynamic compared to European monarchs who moved to exert control, whereas the Tokugawa shogunate displayed its control by forcing the daimyo to move. Another point worth expanding on is the strict formality of the daimyo processions. They weren't just military parades, but rather carefully orchestrated performances with deep ritual significance. As Vapores also points out, they took on an almost theatrical character over time, with the road serving as a stage and the entourage as actors, especially the Yako footmen, who added an element of spectacle with their exaggerated movements. This contrasts with European processions, which often had celebratory elements, music, and a lot of crowd interaction. Overall, daimyo processions were both a show of strength and a forced demonstration of obedience, a reminder to both the public and the daimyo themselves of their subordinate role in the Tokugawa system. And it's super fascinating to contrast with European traditions where movement signified sovereignty rather than submission.
Very interesting to see those similarities and contrasts between the two cultures. For question 3, how did the shift in daimyo processions from wartime to peacetime reflect broader changes in Tokugawa governance?
Yeah, my name is Thomas, and I'll be answering this question. That's a really interesting question, actually. So, before the Tokugawa shogunate was established around the turn of the 17th century, Japan had experienced a period of civil war that lasted centuries, in what is often referred to as the Warring States period. During this time, as the various daimyos maneuvered against one another in their struggle for power, these sorts of processions served a practical military function. It was important for the daimyos to be able to effectively move their armies in order to conduct war. After the Tokugawa secured its hegemony, however, Japan entered into a period of prolonged peace, and the daimyo processions began to take on new elements, which reflected the new relationships that the daimyos had with each other and their subservience to the shogunate. In many respects, the mandatory daimyo processions functioned as a tool for the Tokugawa to maintain control over its daimyos and to ensure the stability of its sovereignty. Under the Tokugawa, the processions evolved into elaborate performative displays, and the sorts of theatrics expected from these parades were time-consuming to prepare and expensive. This prevented the daimyos from having the time or resources that would have been necessary to conduct war against each other or the shogunate. The processions to and from Edo, while the shogun remained sedentary, served as a reminder that the shogun was the physical center of sovereignty, and the requirement that daimyos allow the processions of other daimyos to pass through their domains facilitated peaceful relations between them. The processions also allowed the daimyo to demonstrate their wealth and positions in relation to one another and the relationship to the shogunate. The size of the processions was regulated by the shogun and was determined by the officially assessed economic output of each domain. This, however, did not stop some daimyo from illegally augmenting their numbers by hiring temporary laborers to bolster their numbers. This demonstrates that the daimyos viewed the processions as a public display of their wealth and power rather than as strictly military exercises as they had been previously.
The primary political purpose of the daimyo processions was to reinforce the elements already present in the Senkin Kotai system. By forcing them to relocate on a semi-frequent basis, the shogun was able to clearly display its power over daimyo to remind both them and the general public who was truly in control. To quote Porus, the shogun's authority derived not from movement and public visibility, but from his stasis, his relative inaccessibility at the center, and his ability to cause his subordinates to move in orbit around him. Additionally, the economic and temporal burden of near constant relocation ensured that daimyo were never in a position to build up the resources or effectively organize any opposition against the shogunate. The expenses of travel and the amount of time that daimyo spent on the road served as a clear indication of the shogun's authority to any who witnessed their movements. Eventually, a subculture developed around the hospitable and theatrical elements of daimyo processions. They evolved into a grand spectacle that involved the use of bright banners, uniforms, and military regalia, all of which were meant to reinforce the image of the daimyo as a military authority, as well as display the extent of their wealth and influence. The booming popularity of the event, combined with the increasing size of daimyo entourages throughout the period, led to concerns over the concentration of military personnel in the capital, as well as general overcrowding of city streets. As a result, restrictions on the amount of personnel that could accompany daimyo during the procession were issued in the laws for military houses of 1635, 1653, and again in 1701 and 1712, though adherence to these restrictions varied depending on the domain. Until the practice was discontinued with the dissolution of the shogunate at the end of the Edo period, the processions remained a male-dominated event.
And that wraps up our discussion on daimyo processions and their role in Tokugawa Japan. We explored how these processions were more than just travel. They were political statements, theatrical performances, and tools of control, from their military origins to their transformation into costly performative spectacles. Daimyo processions reinforced the power of the shogunate while also allowing lords to showcase their status. We also looked at how these events compared to European aristocratic processions, highlighting the unique way the Tokugawa shogunate maintained authority by keeping the daimyo constantly moving while the shogun remained at the center of power in Edo. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and to my team for a great discussion. And of course, thanks to Team Daimyo for their insightful video. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring history. Thanks for watching.